Canon Films, the home of high-powered, high-voltage motion picture entertainment.
Hi, I'm Austin Trunick, author of the Canon Film Guide. And you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll with Joe K.
We're Canon Films, and we're dynamite.
This is not a test, this is Play That Rock and Roll, podcast edition. I'm your host, Joseph K., and like the song at the start says, just call me Joe. Hey, guess what? It's not just me again today. We have another guest. Yes, Play That Rock and Roll is proud to present our second ever guest. His name is Austin Trunick, and he is the author of the Canon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 to 1984. This is a new book. It was just released in June of this year. Volume 2 is slated for release in fall 2021, and Volume 3 scheduled to come out some point after that. For those who are familiar with this book and may have a copy already, I would point you over to Austin's Twitter page to see about getting a signed book plate. He's giving those out for free to anybody who's bought a copy of the book. I believe he had planned to do signings on a book tour this year, but obviously with COVID-19, those plans, I guess, went out the window. So, in place of getting your book signed, you can reach out to him, and he'll send you a free bookplate sticker that you can put in the cover of your book. Got mine right here. Looks great. Very cool thing he's doing. So, while he's doing that, you should absolutely reach out to him and get yours. So, for those who aren't familiar, the Canon Film Guide Volume 1 is the first in a series of 3 volumes of books that are going to be about the movies released by Canon Films during the years Canon was owned by Menahem Golan Yorum Globus. If you're not familiar with Canon Films, the best way I can describe it is they're the film company behind all the Charles Bronson and Chuck Norris movies that filled the shelves of every video rental store in the 1980s and 90s. Canon was an incredibly prolific film production company in the 80s and early 90s, and they didn't produce many films that were hits theatrically, but they did produce many films that found cult status and fandoms after the release in video rental stores in the age of home video and cassettes. I absolutely love this book because I absolutely love talking about Canon films. To me, the story of Canon is an incredibly interesting topic, and I could talk for hours and hours about it. And that's because I've been a Canon fan for just about as long as I've been a fan of movies. Frankly, when I think of my book collection, this is probably my favorite book on the subject of film itself. So I can't recommend it enough. If you're a fan of 80s action movies, guys like Chuck Norris, Charles Bronson, Michael Dudikoff, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Sylvester Stallone did a couple of Canon movies. This is such a great book to check out because the personalities behind the scenes are every bit as interesting as some of the on-screen characters. That said, the subject of this book makes Austin sort of an unconventional guest for a show primarily about classic rock, which is what this show is. But this is really just a good opportunity for me to say that I do plan on having guests on in the future that aren't going to have strong connections to the subject of classic rock. So the interview portion of this show is going to be a little bit more big tent. Now, the reason I wanted Austin to be a guest on this show is because that I believe that there is probably quite a bit of crossover between people who are fans of the movies he's writing about and people who are fans of the music I like to talk about. I'm guessing people who like Canon films and the movies of that era are also classic rock fans. And classic rock fans who may not be familiar with Canon films might find some really interesting stuff that they can get into here as well. So I think that it's a good topic to cover. And of course, it did give us a good opportunity to talk about something that is a big deal in classic rock history, and that's film soundtracks. Canon Films has had a number of movies that have had big name soundtracks with classic rock artists, and we do talk a little bit about that in this interview. What you're going to hear about in this interview, because like my first interview, this is a two-parter. In part one, we introduce the topic of Canon films, and we also talk about Menahem Golan and Yorum Globus, who were the men behind the company. We talk about some of the movies that were released from Canon before Golan and Globus took over. We then move on to talk about Canon's long-standing relationship with actor Charles Bronson. We talk about their most famous teen sex comedy, The Last American Virgin, and how that film is actually a little more interesting than you might think, and more. And hey, this is just part one. We got even more good stuff coming up in part two. Again, hopefully out next week. So if you want to learn more about the book, or if you want to order the book, you can find information about it on Austin's website, which is canonfilmguide.com. You can also find Austin on social media at Canon Film Guide on Twitter and Canon Film Guide on Facebook as well. And finally, just a warning about the audio. It's a little wonky because we had to use a different source for my audio versus what I recorded from Austin on my webcam. We both sound fine. It's just a noticeable fluctuation in the source of the sound for both of them. Shouldn't be a big deal. I probably notice it more than most people, but just a heads up about that. It's an issue I'm working on, and hopefully I'll have fixed before I have anyone else on the show. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to Austin for coming on the show. It was a great conversation. It was great to meet him. Really nice guy. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. So let's take a listen to that. Thanks for tuning in. I am such a huge Canon Films fan, and I appreciate you taking a chance on like a music-based podcast. I just sort of felt like there's got to be a big overlap between fans of Canon Films and like fans of AC/DC, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd imagine you're right there.
We're talking about Canon Films today. Can you give a brief introduction to those who might not have any idea what we're talking about? What is Canon Films, and why is their story so awesome that it requires a 3-volume compendium to tell it in properly?
Yeah, well, Canon Films, specifically the Canon that I am writing about in these books, was in the 80s the company that really came up out of nowhere, this independent company, and was almost able to challenge the major studios. And they really did it by playing by their own rules, doing things their own way, jumping on trends, blazing new trails as far as, especially like video distribution deals. The company was headed by two guys, Menahem Golan Yorum Globus. They were cousins, about a decade apart in age. Menahem was the older one. He was the creative guy. He was the one who would come up with the ideas. He'd find the stars. He'd chase them down. He'd be the one making deals on napkins, coming up with just a title and having them make a movie out of it. Yorum was his quiet cousins, a guy who didn't do a ton of interviews. It's tough to find footage of and just him talking back then, because he let Menahem be the spokesperson, their face. But he was a financial genius for many years, as far as being able to sell movies abroad before the movies were made, and meaning that a movie would automatically be a profit. They would already made the money on the movie before they even made it, and that was Canon's business. They would make low budget movies, sell the video rights for a bunch of money, sell it in every country around the world, and it would play in a few theaters in the US usually, and go straight to video here. But they made money, and that was the empire that they built. Later on, they started making bigger movies, more expensive movies. They wanted to be an actual major studio, and that strategy no longer works. When it became a problem, and that's what led to the company's downfall. But from 1980 to 1994, which is what the 3 books will cover, Canon produced over 200 films and distributed hundreds and hundreds more. And they were really in any genre you can imagine, from martial arts to musicals to horror movies to science fiction. And they were all over the video shelves. And these were movies that were usually some of them were pretty darn crazy. And I think that's what people love about them today.
So Menahem passed away a number of years ago, but Yorum is still alive. When you started this project, did you ever hope to actually talk to Yorum? And have you had a chance?
I've tried. I've sent the messages. I've not had the luck yet. I would love to someday, even if the first 2 books get out there and I can even find him by the time to talk to him for the 3rd one. But I've tried representatives. He's actually got a new film venture that he just launched a few years back, where he's trying to turn YouTube stars into movie stars. They haven't really done much, but I tried. When that was announced, I tried getting a hold of him. I really, really hope to someday. That would be the most amazing result I can imagine. I would just love to pick his brain, because so little. He did so few interviews back in the day, and there are just so many questions I have for him. So fingers crossed sometime. I've been trying really hard, though. I've been hanging on doors, sending emails.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I hope so, man. I think I saw one interview with him recently, and it was like more with his son, and his son was doing all the talking. So maybe I in the back of my mind, I wonder if he's worried about doing an interview and like accidentally admitting to like a whole bunch of like financial crimes or something.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a few that are buried in there.
Yeah, because of like the fandom of cult films, podcasts, YouTube shows. There was that documentary in 2014, Electric Boogaloo. People have been talking about Canon, I think, more now than maybe since their heyday. What were the things that made you really want to write this book? Did this book did the idea for this book originate in the last 10 years, or was this something you've been holding on, for as long as you've been a fan?
Well, the idea came around. I've been writing about movies for various outlets online for more than a decade now, but I wanted a project I could write on my own, and so that was something I wanted to sort of I was thinking about in my head for a long time. In my work, I get sent a lot of Blu-rays and DVDs and things like that to review, and a lot of the Canon movies started being put out again on Blu-ray. And so I would listen to the commentaries, and these were all movies I grew up on. These were movies I'd rented as a teenager, seen as a kid. I'd watch with my buddies in their basement, and it was amazing to revisit them. And then I'd hear the stories. You have people like Sam Furstenberg or James Bruner talking on these commentaries, and it's just the stories you hear are crazy. And so that was when I started really with the idea to start writing. I didn't know it was going to be a book. I thought I was going to write articles about the making of different Canon movies. And as I did that, I wrote several of them. It grew. I wanted to write about more. Then it became a book that was going to be maybe my 30 favorite Canon movies.
Oh, okay.
And I read, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it became what it is, this massive, probably 2,000-page set of 3 books covering hundreds of films. And like you mentioned, there was the attention, the Electric Boogaloo, the Golan Globus did their own documentary right before Menahem passed away, the Go-Go Boys. And these were wonderful because they proved to me that there was still an audience. I wasn't the only one who was out there. So I feel like 10 years ago, you really had to search in different forums, longer than that, to find other people who love it. Now there's an amazing Facebook group that's all just Canon fans. There are, just these great documentaries, and then more and more of the movies being reissued on Blu-ray.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know what? I was just looking at buying the new Death Wish 3 Blu-ray that's on the way. That looks pretty fancy. Yeah,
it's really well done. That's a movie that looks super grimy, and I'm used to it looking just like it's sticky on the camera or something.
Yeah. The winner.
And it's just that's just the terrible transfers I've been watching my whole life. I thought it was meant to look like that, but no, they have a new 2K scan on the Blu-ray, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. I didn't know a Canon movie could look that good.
Right. You know, I think the best part of Electric Boogaloo is like the end card where it says "True to form." Golan Globus put their own documentary out 3 months before this one or something. I watched a little bit of Go-Go Boys. What did you think of their take on their own history?
It's definitely the how do I phrase it? They're very polite about themselves. They're not. It's definitely an authorized documentary where I wish it could have dug more, but it's worth seeing, and it is great to see, especially Yorum on there. That's one of the few places you can see him reflecting on these years.
Yeah.
And Menahem is in there, and it's great. There's a fantastic documentary, another one that's free on YouTube that was put out in 2015 called Goodbye, Mr. Cinema.
Oh.
And it's a filmmaker following around Menahem Golan around his home, basically in the last months of his life. And that's the sort of documentary I wish we would have gotten with both of them about Canon. And just because it is it's a little less polished, and these guys are reflecting, and it's not the most positive view of these guys. It's more honest, I think. He's honest about his own legacy, and it's.
I'll have to check that one out, because I sort of agree with you. Like the authorized history is always a little whitewashed. When you were putting this book together, I guess besides the documentaries that have been made about him, what other resources did you pull from for maybe it doesn't even have to be Canon related, but other books on film, or I'm sure you read Paul Talbot's books. Yeah. What works helped guide you in your process?
Well, Paul Talbot. I say it in the Canon Film Guide that if you're interested in Death Wish or any of the Bronson Canon movies, or any Bronson movie period, you need to seek out those books, because it made my job easy, because somebody's already written the definitive work on Charles Bronson's filmography. But yeah, Paul Talbot's books, any Canon fan needs to grab both of those. After that, there's a lot of the research comes from old newspaper articles. Not so much books or documentaries, but I would spend a lot of time going through the Variety archives, going through Hollywood Reporter archives, finding Canon was very good about letting press come to their sets. So if you search local newspaper archives, whether it's the LA Times or, and they shot some movies in Pittsburgh in the early 80s, and you go and you pull up the local newspaper, and that's when you get the most colorful stories too, because the stars there aren't sitting there with a handler next to them. They're just talking off the cuff, and something goes wrong on set in front of the journalist, it's going to end up in the story.
Okay. Yeah.
So those have been a lot of the research. And then just old vintage Canon materials. I've got stacks of press kits, probably about 40 or 50 different Canon press kits, which they all come with the photos and a good 25-page document about the production and bios and all that information. That's great. Old Canon catalogs. I've said this before, but one of the most useful things to track a film's history is Canon would announce a movie, and so if it was just a title or a drawing, sometimes it would just be a picture of one of the stars with a title, and there wouldn't be a script or anything. But then a year later, that same movie's in the catalog, except it's got a different star with the same title, or a same star with a different title. Or you have ones that over the course of 3, 4, or 5 years in these catalogs, the rosters change, the plots change. That's right. That's how you get the classic image of Chuck Norris in American Ninja, where his head's just pasted onto one of the stuntman's bodies. And that was when they just had a title, American Ninja. That movie ultimately became Invasion USA, but for a while they were going to call it American Ninja. They thought they were, and it was going to star Chuck Norris, and it was going to be about him fighting terrorists in Louisiana. It didn't make didn't make a ton of sense there, but that's the best way. It's digging through a lot of materials, a lot of old Canon materials. But yeah, I've got just like sitting here, just one. I'm trying to find a good example, but yeah, they would send these things out to buyers.
I was just going to say, where do you find this stuff? I mean, were you a buyer in '83 or something?
No, I was very lucky. A lot of them came from another collector.
Okay.
And I was able to, and then it's just been tracking different sites. A lot of this stuff goes international. It's tough to find it in the U.S., but looking in, Germany eBay, Spanish eBay, and things like that, the stuff pops up.
You must have invested quite a bit, and you probably have the world's greatest Canon films collection.
It's got to be up there. I got to imagine maybe Yorum's got a nicer archive.
Maybe.
But,
okay.
Yeah, I've got banker boxes stacked full of stuff here.
And I love that you post all that stuff on social media. That is always a treat when you pull something out. People should follow you on Twitter just for that. Unearthing these gems.
There's a lot of stuff that I just don't have room for in the books, and then a lot of things that I learn after, like things I learn about the movies that are in the first book already. That the first book's out already, and it's nice to share that stuff too.
Yeah.
So yeah, social media is a great way. I love it just to keep the conversation going and keep sharing stuff. That's fun.
It keeps it alive, because people have this idea that once something disappears or once something's on the internet, it's there forever, but that's not true at all. This stuff has to be cycled through fairly regularly for people to get a look at it. You telling talking about Chuck Norris's face on the American Ninja thing makes me think of two things. One, it is odd that they had Chuck for all those years and they never made a ninja movie with him. and the other thing is, what is that the most egregious jump from the original planned movie to what it ended up being when it was produced, or are there other examples that are even more of a stretch from the genesis of the idea to what ended up being on screen?
There are. The one that I think 10 to Midnight has a great, so you can track various drawings of it, because it's one that I after Death Wish 2, Canon wanted to make another Bronson movie immediately, and they were going to overseas to sell it, and they didn't have anything other than the title 10 to Midnight, which they liked. So they took just a drawing of Charles Bronson and a tagline that's like a deadline, a killer, something along that, and took it, and they sold the movie. Then they came back and they had to make a script out of it, and what's in those original drawings does not reflect what the movie finally was about. There was no deadline in the movie. Even the movie itself,
Right.
10 to Midnight, means nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, they don't even like cut to a clock or anything. I just saw it for the first time this week in research for this interview. I had to go to my local library, one of the last ones that still has cassette tapes, and I tracked down 10 to Midnight and
That's
Kinjite.
amazing.
Yeah. Got him in the
Two
old...
very sleazy Bronson movies.
incredibly sleazy movies. I got a whole bunch of Bronson questions, but I got one more before that. This is before, because that's the real meat of Canon films, I feel, is guys like Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson. But Canon existed before Yorum and Menahem bought it, right?
Yes.
And I don't know very much about what they were producing before the Go-Go Boys. I just remember from Electric Boogaloo that basically three things. That Peter Boyle movie Joe, the Happy Hooker series, and just straight up Swedish pornography. Was there anything else in that library, the pre-Golan Globus Canon library, that you found?
There is a lot. The Canon before Golan Globus was very much your grindhouse style stuff. A lot of TNA movies, a lot of like you said, the Swedish porn. They love to take foreign movies and redub them and release them. Joe was their biggest hit, and
Great
the thing that they were really known for before that. But Canon actually, when Golan Globus bought it from them, they wanted to get an established U.S. company to sort of have their foothold into the market here, have a distribution sort of plan. But they had bought the old catalog, so a lot of these Canon catalogs that I have an extra 100 movies in the back, and it's just all the things that they owned the rights to, and they could keep selling over and over again to finance the movies that they were making. But some of these are wonderful. I'm looking at it, just this page here that's open, but we have like stuff like Naughty Schoolgirls, Teenage Hitchhikers, Teenage Tramp, How to Score with Girls. It's that's a lot of the type of stuff that Canon pre-Golan Globus was putting out.
How many of those pre-Golan and Globus movies did you watch in the writing process for this? Were you tempted to include a chapter on any of them, just like almost like a preface?
Yeah, well, before I knew what this book was going to look like and that I wanted to focus on the Golan Globus years, I had even written some chapters on some of the earlier ones. I did one on hot T-shirts and one on gas pump girls, both like late 70s.
I gotta write these down so I can look them up.
I wrote entire chapters that are close to what's in the book about the making of those movies, and then I tore them out when I decided I was like, I need to boil this down and focus on only 100 and some movies,
Right.
and not do the whole gamut. But yes, I watched some of them, Joe. But yeah, at a certain point, I had to draw a certain starting point. And for me, the stuff I'm familiar with and stuff that actually you can still find these days
Right.
is all the stuff that came out during the video era, during Golan Globus's reign.
As someone who appreciates your writing, are those abandoned chapters? Do you have any plans to put those online or in later editions or anything?
I'll find somebody somewhere to post them at some point.
Good.
Once I'll have to go back. 'Cause those were some of the earliest ones I wrote. So they're probably pretty raw.
Well, it's all right. In that in the early Canon days, is there anything worthwhile at all, or is it all junk?
Joe is actually a pretty memorable film. The story of that one is interesting because I kind of get into it in the Exterminator 2 chapter in the book, because William Sachs, who was the second director to work on Exterminator 2, Canon hired him to come in and shoot more scenes and fix it up and get it into a releasable state. He was a very sought after film fixer.
That was a very cool chapter. I really enjoyed that. That's a really good story.
He was an awesome guy to talk to. He's somebody who deserves an entire book just about his career, because he's fascinating and has worked on so many things that, his name's not on.
Right.
But yeah, so he took Joe originally and he recut it, and he went and added the original one. John Avildsen later did Rocky and Karate Kid. Finished it. It didn't really focus so much on Peter Boyle's character. He was more of a very small character. And when William Sachs came in, he brought Joe to the forefront and made it. And it's Joe, and the movie's about him. And the movie became a big success. And it wouldn't have had he not gone in there and recut it for Canon.
Okay, that's interesting. So pass on the Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood or whatever.
If you want to get into the Happy Hooker movies, I think the cheapest way to buy it is a full 3-movie set.
Oh, okay.
Great. One disc with all 3 movies on it. You might as well if you're going to watch. I had to watch all 3 of them to write about the third one.
Now we're going to get into the real meat of Canon films. Let's start with Charles Bronson. Charlie B, as I like to call him. I hope that I can get that to, get picked up on social media. I don't know why it cracks me up, but it does. So, Canon's first, with Golan Globus, their first proper hit was Death Wish 2, right?
Yeah,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so...
Their first, put them on the map.
Okay. And when I think of Canon films, I definitely do think of what you said a little bit earlier when you said, trend chasing. And I wonder, I always sort of wondered about the genesis of the relationship between Canon and Charlie, because after Death Wish 2, they had such a long partnership with him. I wonder if they saw the success that Warner Brothers was having with Clint Eastwood, and if they thought, Charlie can be our version of that, or do you think it was closer to, holy shit, we have a real hit with Death Wish 2, Bronson's our meal ticket, we gotta hang on to this guy all the way through? Or do you think there was another reason that, there was such a long-standing relationship between him and the company?
I think it was a beneficial relationship for both of them. I think one of Canon's things was their business was selling the movies abroad. And Charles Bronson was a star here because of Death Wish, but outside of that, most U.S. audiences knew him as a character actor, or a side actor in westerns.
Oh, okay.
And he had a lot of films, especially after Death Wish, that played in theaters, but abroad he was a superstar. He was somebody in Italy and Spain and a lot of the European countries. You could put him on a billboard and people would flood to see it because he was just huge overseas. In Japan, he was a cologne spokesperson, and
okay, right.
foreign other countries were just crazy. So a Charles Bronson movie, it would come out in the U.S. and it would do modest business, but they could always reliably get big sales and sell it a lot of places for very little work, and that was their business plan.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I think that was the reason they kept going back to Charles Bronson. And I think, they made the movies. They worked when he worked with them. He was usually directors that he really liked, guys he'd worked with before. He'd have a lot of say in casting. He could bring in actors and friends of his for, to play villains or small parts.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of these old. What's that?
Jill Ireland too, his wife.
Yeah. Jill would. She produced a couple of them, and she came in and she did Assassination and Death Wish 2 there. And yeah, So I think it was good for him. It kept him working. They were willing to keep making these movies, and they made them mostly on his terms.
So I wonder why, because there were definitely accounts in Talbot's books, and I believe also in yours, and I've read some stuff online too, that he was sort of grumpy and ornery on set. He wasn't always the happiest guy. So if he's getting paid like an A-lister, star of the show, face on the poster, working with directors he's picking, got his family involved, well, what the heck? Why was he so unhappy all the time?
Well, I don't know that it was unhappy so much as maybe a little. I don't think he really saw himself as a movie star, or at least got into the movie star personality. Oh. He came from a coal mining family in West Virginia, very blue collar. I think he saw making these movies as work.
Oh, okay.
And wasn't as big into the extracurriculars that would often go with that. I know you hear so many stories about him just being driven nuts by paparazzi and just not liking that invasion of privacy. And it was also during, especially in the later Canon years with him, not the happiest time in his life. His wife was very sick, Jill Ireland had a very public battle with cancer. And so him being a family man, he didn't like to do things that would take him. I don't think he liked being away from his family. Yeah. And so a lot of times it would be just get the movie done as fast as possible so I can be at home.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is sad. So in Volume 1, you write about these 3 Death Wish sequels, 2, 3, and 4. Of course, I have to ask, is Death Wish 5 going to be in a later edition, or does that not technically count as canon?
It's canon adjacent.
Right.
I talk a little bit about it at the end of the Death Wish chapter in this book, but that was made by 21st Century Film Corporation, which was Menachem's company after he had his falling out with Yorum and split from Canon. So he took a bunch of things with him, and one of those things was a Death Wish sequel rights. So he produced it. Menahem Golan produced Death Wish 5, but it wasn't a canon feature.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask about 21st Century, because I was going to say, besides Death Wish, he took a couple other. I looked on their Wikipedia page, and I think some of the American Ninja movies end up on that one.
Yeah, the last where Captain America is probably one of the most famous movies they put out.
Yeah.
With because Canon for years and years and years they were going to make Captain America and Spider-Man, and
right.
Those were the 2 Marvel properties they bought when Marvel was going bankrupt, and they never came through. But Menachem did eventually make a pretty wonderfully cheesy Captain America with Albert Pune in 1990.
Yeah, I want to say I saw that years ago. I don't remember it very well. I know there's some Captain America movies from the 70s, too, that are also delightfully cheesy. So, in preparation for having you on, I sought out not just 10 to Midnight, which I enjoyed, and Kinjite, but also Messenger of Death. What, so far, besides the Death Wish movie, well, Death Wish movies included, what of the Charlie Bronson movies have been the most fun for you to revisit and write about, and which ones, if there were any, were you a little, maybe disappointed by, if it had been a long time since you'd last seen it?
Well, there's definitely tiers I can break the 8 Bronson canon movies into. 10 to Midnight I love. It's just an underrated. I feel like it works as almost like a slasher.
Yeah.
But yeah, very underrated thriller. That's one I'm surprised isn't like a universal 80s classic outside, just known by everybody and beloved, because I think it's really good.
It had to be stopped. Forget what's legal, do what's right. After all the evidence is in, he'll reach his own verdict and execute the sentence by the deadline when there is no justice. This man is the law. 10 to midnight. Charles Bronson.
I love Death Wish 4 of all the Death Wish movies just because of John P. Ryan.
Yes! Yes!
The Canon's go-to bad guy, and he's just so wonderful and everything. But yeah, Death Wish 4, he just makes it so much fun.
He's working to destroy the drug empire.
It's a setup!
It's either him or us.
Now, Bronson is their target. The trap is set.
Here he comes.
The fuse is lit. Bronson is unleashed. Charles Bronson, Death Wish 4, The Crackdown.
Assassination, I think, is a really fun one. It's definitely a lower tier, but he did it with Jill Ireland. She plays the president's wife, and he's her bodyguard, and they kind of get stuck together during this big assassination plot. And I like that one because you can tell that he's having fun. He was making a movie with his wife, and they could be together. And
You've been reporting our whereabouts to the president?
Charles Bronson.
Has it ever occurred to you that the president might be the one who wants you dead?
Jill Ireland.
Cal would never hurt me.
Bronson. Assassination.
he just seems a little bit like he's having a better time. If you can get a sense from a Charles Bronson performance where
Right.
his trademark is looking like he's not having a good time.
Yeah.
Murphy's Law is a really fun one. That is, he's a cop again, but he gets handcuffed to a car thief who's very foul-mouthed. And that one's just worth saying. There's got to be a supercut on YouTube of just, they made up the most gibberish, wacky, like donkey fart. She just calls them names the whole time, and they're just awful, crazy, weird stuff. Rather than just swearing, which I guess was what she was supposed to do in the original script.
Ballistics identified your gun as the murder weapon. You're going to jail, Jack.
I heard they arrested a cop. What the hell are you doing?
And she's his only way out.
Someone's framed me for 3 murders.
Now they're both running for their lives. Charles Bronson is Jack Murphy. Murphy's gotten out. Now he's getting even. Charles Bronson. Murphy's Law.
I think after that, like, they all sort of fall middle of the pack. The ones I'm probably the least fan of, Death Wish 2, just because how creepy Michael Winner is and the stuff he added, and
Sure.
the rape scene in that one is very, very graphic and uncomfortable.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's unpleasant.
I think there's a few points in that movie where it goes a little too far, but that makes it, out of all the Death Wishes, that's the one I'm like least likely to drop in there, even though the soundtrack is incredible.
Right.
Charles Bronson.
Goodbye.
Death Wish 2. He's doing it for you.
Did you see, it's like a film talk show or something where it's a British show where Michael Winner and her name is it Anna Rayburn? It's a film critic where they argue about the movie. And he, in the middle of the interview, asks her if she's ever been raped while laughing. And she says, yes, I have, but that's not your business. And it is the most unbelievably awkward interview I've ever seen, and it makes Winner look like such a piece of shit.
I don't see anything wrong today in showing what goes on in life. It was not done.
But it isn't like that in life. I'm sorry,
well, you
Mr.
don't
Winner.
know, Anna. You've never been raped.
Have you ever asked me?
Well, have you been raped?
Yes, I have, as a matter of technical interest. Is it of any relevance to your film?
No.
That is not how rape takes place. You're dealing with a
I'm
reenactment.
sorry, we dealt with many police and psychiatrists, researchers on this picture.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, yeah.
It's very uncomfortable. There's Michael Winner is. There's a behind-the-scenes photo of him on The Wicked Lady. Actually, he's got a big pair of scissors, and he's cutting the woman's clothes off of her.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that embodies Michael Winner. That's the first image I see in my head when I think of him. Kind of a creep.
I can't think of her name. She's in Death Wish 3. She's Deanna Troi on Star Trek.
Marina Sirtis?
I think that's correct. It's not coming to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I know she's talked about how just nasty he was, And I got his autobiography, and I'm almost afraid to read it because, I'm going to start ripping pages out or something. Cause
it's interesting. I've read it, and he does have some good stories in there, but he's also, I think that it's one of these books where he loves talking most about how famous he is and how many famous friends he has. So
yeah.
That's probably the roughest part of the book.
Right.
Element of that.
Yeah, just the best type of person, Going back a little bit now, I'm so glad you brought up John P. Ryan. I used to do movie reviews on YouTube years ago, and I remember I talked about Death Wish 4 and 1, I talked about Delta Force 2, and both times I was just like, John P. Ryan is maybe the greatest character actor ever. He is so freaking funny. And I just saw Runaway Train earlier this year, too, and he's really good in that as well. Are there besides those three, does he show up in other Canon films that you can think of offhand?
Yeah, it's Death Wish 4, Avenging Force, Runaway Train. Gosh, I know I'm blanking on something.
Yeah. Well, I hope people look him up because he is always a treat when he shows up. So, what did you think of? Just because I watched it this week, and I'm wondering with what your opinion, because this is another sleazy one. What did you think of Kinjite? Or do you not want to give it away because that'll be in a later copy, in a later edition?
Not one of my favorite Bronson ones. I'm amazed by how sleazy they were able to make that one.
Yeah. And racist.
Yes, yeah. That too. It's a very, very... he doesn't say very many nice things about Asians in that film.
We have a 14-year-old brought in last night. Been in town 72 hours. Gang raped, abandoned.
A realm of secret appetites and hidden passions.
If she wasn't enjoying it, why didn't she cry for help?
Because of shame.
A realm where nothing is taboo.
It was Duke who put you out on the street. He made you turn tricks.
Duke was good to me.
Charles Bronson.
Everybody, on the floor, now!
Kinjite, forbidden subjects.
That's one that was rewritten very heavily. In Paul Talbot's second book, he gets into the making of that one. And yeah, that and Messenger of Death, he talking about what the scripts originally looked like, and they were very different from what ultimately made it to screen.
Is that mostly because of the director, J. Lee Thompson?
Yeah, in the case, there was a Writers Guild strike in the late 80s, and the writers couldn't come in to revise or do revisions themselves, so the director largely... The director and the producer would go and just do what they please.
Oh, geez. So Menahem was in there too. Okay, well, that's the great stuff. I love talking about Charlie Bronson, but I don't have a good segue. Let's go from old to young, take a hard left turn, and talk about Canon's teen sex romps, and how their most famous one isn't as sleazy as that sounds. So I dropped the ball. I didn't get a chance to watch Last American Virgin recently, but I've heard, and you definitely make it sound like it's not your typical Porky's teen sex romp. It's maybe closer to like Fast Times at Ridgemont High than Porky's. A little like the story's a little better, the characters are a little better. What do you think sets that apart from the rest of the sleaze in the mid '80s?
Well, it's a very heartfelt story in that one. The movie was based on Lemon Popsicle. The same director, Boaz Davidson, had made it for Golan Globus in Israel before they came over to the United States, and it was a huge hit for them in so many countries, everywhere but the U.S. Mm-hmm. And he had based a lot of it on his own teenage years, his own experiences, and I think that comes through. It's got one of the most heartbreaking endings in a movie. I won't spoil anything, but let me know when you watch it, and let me know if you're wiping away a tear at the end. It's something that's great about it too is that the cast is actual teenagers. A lot of these kids were 15, 16 years old. Lawrence Monson, who plays the main character, was too young to even get the job, so he had to go get a fake ID so he could be in the Canon movie because he was only 15, and he was in an R-rated movie.
Okay.
So yeah, he presented Canon with a fake ID, which is just incredible to think.
Well, this is get away with,
Yeah, it's a fun movie. I mean, it does have a lot of your standard Porky style nudity, but there's a lot of heart to the actual story that's told there. Incredible soundtrack too.
The Last American Virgin, featuring songs by Blondie, The Cars, Devo, Journey, The Police, REO Speedwagon, Tommy Tutone, and more. The Last American Virgin. See it or be it.
Yeah. Shake it up.
The Lemon Popsicle movies, the original Israeli one, it was all 50s. Elvis and Chuck Berry and stuff on the soundtrack, and that soundtrack became a big hit overseas. So when they came here, they wanted to do something different. They had set it in the 80s rather than the 50s, and it was Devo, The Waitresses, The Cars, U2, and a very early soundtrack appearance from U2, and it did very well. The soundtrack was really one of those very, very early new wave to really capture the new wave soundtracks.
So one of the rare moments where Canon was a little ahead of the curve.
Yes.
Because soundtracks were huge in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So with Lemon Popsicle, the Israeli films, that was a pretty long-running series, right? There's a whole bunch of those. Did you watch any or all of them?
I watched clips from a lot of the sequels. There are lots. There are a lot of Lemon Popsicle movies, but they were being made really in Israel while Canon was working in the U.S. They were being just produced as Golan Globus movies over there. The first one I've seen, and it's fun to watch it, especially when I was familiar first with Last American Virgin, because some of the scenes are dead matches. It's just amazing to see like different actors saying almost the same lines. It's staged the same way. Even like some of the actors in them look similar to each other, and yeah, it's interesting. If you're a fan of Last American Virgin, haven't seen Lemon Popsicle, definitely check it out because it's just like watching the same movie but an alternate, like the foreign version. You see foreign TV shows.
Yeah, I just wondered, like, if the later ones kept any level of quality, or if those, like most sequels, kind of got worse and worse. I imagine those are very hard to find. Europe, they're easier to find. You can get import discs to get them. They're more similar to some movies that appear in the second. That are written about in the second volume. Yeah, there's a movie called Hot Resort and a movie called Hot Chili. Okay. And Hot Chili actually stars one of the actors from Last American Virgin playing basically the same role, and it's got some of the scenes that are like very similar, very much almost repeated from what's in Last American Virgin.
And I think both of those movies are spiritually like the same as the other Lemon Popsicle movies, except they just had different casts.
Oh, okay. So Lemon Popsicle was like a well that Canon kind of went back to again and again.
Yeah, they kept bringing the same actors back in each one. Well, Last American Virgin, they actually expected it to be a franchise, like they had with Lemon Popsicle.
Yeah.
And they had signed the boys on, not Diane Franklin, who later was on Bill and Ted, and she was not signed on for sequels, but the guys had in their contract for they could keep making these movies. So the expectation was that it would take off and be. It didn't. There were so many teen movies, and it kind of really came at the tail end of that kind of Porky's Fast Time, and you were getting more into the John Hughes things.
Oh,
which
interesting.
I think kind of shifted what teen movies were going to do very, very well at the box office, and Canon just shifted their focus.
That's real interesting. Do you think Last American Virgin is sort of like a bridge between the Porky's Fast Times and the John Hughes teen movies? Sort of like a middle ground?
You could definitely make that argument.
Oh,
okay. It's got the explicit nudity and the sexual hijinks, but it's a pretty heartfelt, honest teenage love story. So that's a good description.
That's real interesting. Okay. I'll have to check that out. I'm very curious to see that one because I do love a lot of Johnny Hughes movies, and I don't love Porky's, but the third one has a great ending. If you've never seen it,
if I can make another book recommendation,
please.
It's a book called Teen Movie Hell, and it's by Mike McPadden, and it's excellent. It's similar to it's a film guide, but it's just essays about teen sex comedies, really covering all of them. So many I haven't heard of, but it's one that I've had to use for reference when I have to go back and think, what happened in the last Revenge of the Nerds movie?
Oh,
rather than typing it in the internet, I'll grab Teen Movie Hell off the shelf and read a very thoughtful analysis of.
That is fantastic. I'm going to check that out. I think maybe. I love books like that. I think that's why I am such a fan of yours, because, I've seen these movies, but, if I want to think of something or be reminded of something about it, I don't necessarily have the 2 hours to put it on and watch it from start to finish. And that was Austin Trunick, author of The Canon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 to 1984. Volume 2 to be released sometime in fall 2021. In Part 2, we're going to talk about some of the people Austin interviewed for this book. We're going to talk about Canon's Ninja trilogy. We're going to talk about Chuck Norris. We're going to talk a little bit about Sylvester Stallone. We're going to get some of Austin's recommendations on what his favorite Canon films are and where are good places to start for someone who might be new to Canon films. And we even get a little bit of a tease for Canon Film Guide Volume 2 with a great behind-the-scenes story that was totally news to me. So a lot of good stuff coming up in Part 2. If you enjoyed this part we just had, definitely come back for Part 2. That one might be even better. So I just again have to say thank you to Austin for coming on the show. Like I said to him, I really appreciated that he took a chance on a show that is not about movies. It was meant a lot to me to have a great conversation with him, and he was a fantastic guest. Couldn't have been a nicer guy. So I'm really hoping he'll come back when he puts out Volume 2. And since Volume 2 isn't out yet, I will just say in the meantime, get Volume 1. Look at this thing. it's like a phone book. There's so much great stuff in here. You could spend hours going through this again and again. I love this book. It's one of my favorites, and I can't wait for the other two to arrive. So thank you, Austin, again for coming on the show. Very cool. You can find more information about that book at canonfilmguide.com. You can also find Austin on social media at Canon Film Guide on Twitter, Canon Film Guide on Facebook, and at least right now, if you reach out to him on Twitter or social media and you have a copy of the book, he'll do a book plate for you, sign a book plate for you, and send that out for free, which is a very cool thing to do. Hopefully he'll get to do a promotional tour for Volume 2 when that comes out. So after you find Austin on social media and you get his book, make sure you come and find me on social media. I am at Play That Podcast on Twitter, Play That Rock and Roll on Facebook, but if you search Play That Podcast, all one word, you'll find us. And on YouTube, we are youtube.com/c/Play That Rock and Roll. Note the N between rock and roll. And subscribe to that, please. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, or really anywhere you can get podcasts, if you can, please just take a moment and give us a good rating and a review. That is so important to a young show, which this absolutely still is. Comments and ratings are very helpful, and they're very appreciated on this end. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, please take a moment to do that. It means a great deal to me, and I thank you for that. Okay, so all that's left to say, thank you very much for tuning in, and let's have Jimmy Page play us out with some of that great music from the Death Wish 2 soundtrack. Jimmy, take it away.
The Crew Game, where the winners join the losers in the blind. Who's to blame?
Best of
That made me feel like a rock star right there. That was great.
Hell yeah, man.